There it is.
Your team.
So somebody on your team has to get over there.
Hey, Tony, what we're going to say
One,
is
I guess, right?
Winning feels pretty great. Try to find a guy who doesn't care about winning at something. A simple yard game, a video game, sports, a position at work, relationships, grades, something. It's why we count likes on social media, keep score, and measure results. It's also why we sometimes don't want to keep score. It's normal to want to win, but not every win counts the same. A win at work is sometimes, but not always, a win at home. Oh, and Jesus said something about winning the world but losing your soul? What's that about? How can we start really winning?
So I'd been in ministry, I guess 6 years, 7 years. And my youngest daughter at the time was 4 years old. And I found myself driven by this thing to be more successful with ministry, full-time ministry, than with my family. And I realized one day in that period of time that what would it look like if I saved the world, or God used me to save the world, but I didn't save my own family. And so I really began at that time when she was 4 years old to do some things intentionally, to get focused on my family and really find that thing between work-life balance, I think that a lot of us struggle with as men. And so if you fast forward through the years, in 2008, I found myself burned out. I'd been in ministry 27, 28 years, but I felt like a failure. I felt like the joy of what I was doing was completely gone. I was getting up and I was teaching and I was going through all the motions, but it wasn't life-giving. I really came to this time where I stepped away from full-time ministry. Long and short of it is we basically lost everything, and I found myself at 48 living with my mother-in-law, which my mother-in-law is a fantastic person, just to clarify that. And I'm not saying that because I should. I'm saying that because she really is, and she was gracious and opened her home. During that season, I was almost 50. I've lost everything that I think is success, and feeling like an absolute failure at life. You know, when we sit down with other men, we generally go to that place of, so how much money are you making?
Yeah. What do you do?
What do you do? Right. What do you do? And it's hard, I think, as men to find that balance between family and work.
I happen to be kind of in the thick of that. Family will take as much as I can give it, right now. But I also have a really great job that will take as much as I can give it. And I was thinking, why is it, just your exact question. And for me, it's because at the end of a day, at the end of a week even, and definitely at the end of the year on an annual review, I can see the results of what I put in at work.
That's right.
I might get a raise or a promotion or some kind of pat on the back or whatever, and I can see it right away.
Right. I mean, that and the reward of being successful at work is great, but I guess dealing with not being successful at work is easier to handle than dealing with not being successful at home. So you often fear, like going to work and you can live with the results there, but when you feel the results of where you might be falling short or not being successful at home, that can really be like hard. That's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say that because I hear what you're saying, but isn't it true though that even though we know maybe in the end the consequences may be greater on this side than they are on the work side, but how many of you have a hard time really just grasping that in your head?
I know for me, it took a huge argument between my wife and I about 5 years ago when that was put in front of me, like, am I putting my work above my family?
Right.
It was a situation where the two people I report to were gone, and so I was leading the team that particular time, but my wife we had just had our first child, and she was sick, my wife was sick, and that particular day I chose to stay at work versus going home. And coming home, we had a huge argument. But it was that day that I realized, like, wait a minute. At some point, I might not be working at this place anymore. But
Still gonna be there.
I'm still gonna be my wife's husband. I'm still gonna be my daughter's father. I made a point that day. I was like, I'm not gonna be that guy that's gonna put work first.
So it's no secret to anybody that knows me. I work 80 hours a week consistently. And my marriage has struggled from it, but I have an amazing wife who puts up with it. So imagine yourself in a business and you get an email that pops up and you got a 1-star Google review or a 1-star Yelp review. That starts to eat at you. You know, that's me. That's all of me being judged for the world. I bring that home with me, and it never turns off. It never stops. So even to this day, I'm still trying to find like how to do it, because when I go home, I don't turn it off.
For me, I got my family on my calendar first.
There you go.
So I had 3 girls. I went on a date with them individually,
There you go.
and they were some of the most special times.
And you'd actually just book that on.
And I would book it on my calendar.
Right.
And so if it came up during the week, hey, can you see me at this time? No, I can't. I've got an appointment.
That's right.
Nobody has to know what that appointment is.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if we don't go into it being intentional, then it will never happen.
Yeah.
You know what will happen? We'll get at the end of the week, hey, did you go out with your daughter? No, I didn't have time.
Yeah. I like the idea of putting it on the calendar, because then I'm in the middle of my day. I do this with my work. I look to see what's next.
Correct.
You know, I might prepare for that meeting or whatever, but it gives me something to know. I need to save some of myself for this thing that's on my calendar tonight. You know, for this weekend or whatever.
Right.
And you know, with technology today, it's easy to leverage a digital calendar.
Yeah.
You share it with each other, and game over.
Right.
Right.
It's already there.
Yeah.
See, and actually my number one thing I do is I plug this in on my nightstand and I turn it upside down.
Yeah.
And I leave it. I look at it one time. I'll go back normally around 8, 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
But I'll look at it one time. Are there calls that have to be returned? Is there an email or a text that has to be addressed right then?
Right.
But when I get home, my family knows. I mean, I intentionally even put it face down. And that's kind of just even a deal for me of it's
That's
off.
good.
It's done.
Yeah.
My wife and I sit down Sunday nights and do what you're talking about and plan the week. There was a counselor who made us write out our roles, write out our priorities, and then every week we have a weekly planning meeting. And balancing running your own business and having 6 kids and running around and investing in your all these things, right? And so you take the priorities, the big rocks, the things that matter most, that when you wake up in 40 years you want to have done and invested into, and you put them first. Right? And only in crisis do you get them off. And then you fill in the rest of our callings after that. And you don't have to do them all at once.
No.
You can pick one discipline and start there, right? I mean, that's always the big thing. Take one step. Like, okay, we're going to meet on Sunday nights and we're going to plan our week. Let's do that. Or I'm going to turn my phone off when I come home. Pick one thing and start at that point.
Yeah. And, you know, I'll throw one other thing out here. You know, God talked about a Sabbath,
Own your rest.
a day of rest.
Own your rest.
I believe what the Sabbath is representative of is it's us disengaging from what we engage in all week, and disengaging from that and resting. And so it doesn't mean I can't mow my yard. It does. But it's focusing on what I enjoy outside of that work realm, and turning things off, and just being intentional about taking that day. And it's just. It's a key thing. God knows what we need to refresh us.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a certain day of the week.
No.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
You know, I love this scripture in Ephesians. It says, so be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise.
Don't do it to yourself.
Yeah. Make the most of every opportunity in these evil days. Don't act thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do. You know, it's interesting that word evil, when you see it in other places, it actually means full of labors, annoyances, or hardships. So think about it. So basically what Paul is saying is make the most of what God has given you, knowing that the days are what? Full of work, annoyances, and hardships and stress and all of those things that we struggle with as men. You know, when I went through the season that I went through, we'd been at my mother-in-law's, I turned 50. That Father's Day that year, I had got an email from my oldest daughter. And she wrote this long email about how I had been an example to her as a father and shown her what to look for in a husband and how a wife should be treated. And it was just the most powerful email. And I remember in 1992, at that moment when I decided to be intentional, I wrote what I call a tribute statement of what I wanted my kids to say about me at my funeral. And I remember specifically what I said about my daughters was that my dad loved me unconditionally. I always felt like I was his number one. He was my hero. And this was 12, 13 years later. And the last sentence in her email was, "You're my hero." Wow. And she never knew what my tribute statement was. Yeah. But I think what I realized in that moment and what God showed me is you are a success, Ronnie.
There you go. Mm-hmm.
You know, because you took the time to invest in what was most important.
Yeah.
And even though you feel like a failure, you're basing that on things that aren't real, you know. Mm-hmm. Who cares if you're living with your mother-in-law?
Right.
You know, that's not what the most important thing is. And I just want to, I think, challenge us as men is to, you know, to be intentional about, you know, focusing in on what's most important, and that's our families.